This is Caffeinated Risk, the monthly podcast for security professionals by security professionals, focused on the principles of enterprise security risk management, exploring technology and business management issues and how they relate to information security risk. Once a month, two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys bring you analysis, insights, and interviews with leading security risk professionals to learn how they work through a project, a program, or their careers using a risk-based approach to security. Now here are your hosts, Tim McCreet and Doug Leese.
Welcome, John. Thanks for joining us on this podcast. I've had the chance to work with you in the past with the ISA group, but I think this is the first meeting for you and Tim. He surprised me. He said, I read the CyberPHA last night.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So you have some fans.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Tim, for having me on the podcast.
No, absolutely. It's great to have you here. And I actually did some homework last night. I checked out the CyberPHA and some of the work that you had done in past lives. So it was nice to see some of the work that you've been working on is similar to what we've been trying to do with enterprise security risk management, just at a different scale and a different environment, but looking for a similar outcome, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of us that are trying to bring an engineering discipline to industrial cyber. And in my case, I've been leveraging my background in process safety and functional safety. So, from that world, tools like HAZOPs and PHAs are kind of the norm, and bring that level of rigor and discipline to safety engineering. And so when I moved from more of an automation safety background into ICS cybersecurity, I brought a lot of that with me. And so, we should leverage these good engineering tools when we're engineering cybersecurity.
Well, how has that transition been, though, John? When you moved from, maybe you can let our audience know a little bit about your past history and where you've been before and where you are today. But I was really curious too, is how have you found what you did in past lives, what you're able to bring forward? And you mentioned the HAZOP, and Doug and I both having gone through a little bit of that in past lives.
I'm sure.
It'd be interesting for you to say a little bit to our audience too, as well, what that means and how you can apply it here within the cyber side.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, I'm an automation engineer. That's when people ask me what I do, I say I'm an automation engineer, because that's how I started. Coming out of school, that was my first job. I worked at Eastman Chemical, and I programmed PLCs and implemented DCS systems in interesting chemical applications, and a lot of which were in the dark, like literally in the dark, because they were photosensitive. So that was my background, and then over the years, I left Kodak, and I worked for some vendors in the space, and that's really where I got involved in actually designing and building automation products. I was a product manager for a DCS system, and then I became responsible for a safety instrumented system, and that's when I learned all about process safety and functional safety, and how it's so important to have these safeguards in place to prevent what could be catastrophic failures. In those days, it was mostly that was our concern. It was mostly about random failures of electronics or software, systematic bugs, for example, in software that could lead to an unexpected outcome, an unsafe outcome, and therefore you need these fail-safe systems to prevent against that. Dial forward a few years, we all suddenly realized that these programmable electronic network systems could be manipulated through cyber means, either intentionally or unintentionally, to cause the same bad outcome.
Yeah. You touched on it earlier that you and a few others are bringing these engineering disciplines to this. It takes time, but how is that actually working for what you're seeing in the field? Are we moving towards engineering the cyber element into these systems now? I know we might be a decade before we're done, but...
I've definitely seen a progression. So when I first moved into ICS cybersecurity, which was almost 15 years ago, I remember going to a talk was where somebody talked about that cybersecurity still felt like black magic, like voodoo, and there wasn't a lot of engineering rigor around it. It was more people who knew what they were doing would come in and apply the right security controls. And as I said, I when I got into the field, I drew upon my engineering background, and I started doing that. And it's taken some time for that to get a hold. Some clients were early adopters. Actually, some clients pushed me and the companies I was with to go in that direction. I remember doing work for a client, and he said, I want a risk assessment. And we came in and we did what a lot of consultants would do 10, 15 years ago. When you asked for a risk assessment, we would basically do a vulnerability assessment. Come in and here's your gaps, here's your vulnerabilities. And he said, so what? And I said, I don't know what you mean. Here's all your vulnerabilities. Yeah, so what? Which of these are actually going to cause, which ones actually represent high risk to my facility? I want a true risk assessment. And he pushed, like I said, us to figure out how to quantify the risk, or qualify, you might say, rank the risk might be a better term. But he was one of several clients that I started working with over the years that really wanted to go in that direction.
And did you find that when you were working through that process and you had to change and start understanding where, like what, to the client's point, tell me the one that's going to be the most concern for me. Was that a hard thing to switch or to move over to that different type of, even a business focus, I guess, is what you were looking at then, is applying a more of a business concept to his organization, right?
Yeah, because it's not that much unlike business impact analysis, right? Yep. That you're trying to quantify in terms of health, safety, environmental consequences, but ultimately everything you can boil everything down to a cost right. To the business, right? Yep. So a little bit, but fortunately I did have that background. So when he started pushing me in that direction, I said, okay, I've been in HAZOPs, I know what HAZOPs are, and can we apply this to cyber? And that's really kind of where the term CyberPHA was kind of coined by myself and a few others. You could also, cyber HAZOP in many ways is actually a better description of what it is. It's just a methodical, systematic process to walk through. In this case, we do it zone by zone as we go through a system.
Yep.
It ended up getting documented in the ISA IEC 62443, specifically 3-2 subpart that you want to read. It's not a long read. It's about 30 pages. So I ended up chairing that committee. Eventually, I was on the committee, and then somebody stepped down, and I ended up chairing it. So in many ways, it doesn't say the word CyberPHA or cyber HAZOP in the standard, but it is effectively the basic process. First thing it says to do is to conduct a high-level or an initial risk assessment, which is basically, you might just call it a consequence assessment, because it's identifying what are the worst case credible consequences that could be caused by a cyber incident. You're not drilling down, you're not looking at the architecture of the system and all the details. You're just saying, from what we know about this process, say it's a pipeline control system or a tank level monitoring system. Mm-hmm. Tank level is easy. So you just take that. Worst case consequences is a spill. You overfill the tank, and then it might ignite. Right. So that's your worst case credible consequence. So you have to, if you can say definitively there is no way that a cyber incident could cause that because there's so many mechanical safeguards in place that it would be impossible. Technically, according to that process, you're done. If you can say it's not possible that a cyber event could cause this, then you're done. But with modern control systems that are networked and modern safety systems that are also programmable networked, there's usually some way. Yeah. So then the next step is to go perform a detailed risk assessment. And the first step there is to take the system that you're looking at and partition it into security zones and conduits. That's an ISA 62443 construct. Some might call it enclaves. You could also just simply look at it as, from a network engineer's perspective, many times they're subnets on a network, or even VLANs. But you break the system down is the point, because large control system, if it's a very small control system, maybe you don't, maybe it's a single zone. But if it's a larger control system, you want to partition it into these zones. And then the exercise is a very iterative process where you take a look at that zone, you understand the assets that are in the zone, you understand the consequence, you identify which consequences, what are the consequences that could be caused by a breach of that zone, and you define some threat scenarios. So basically, you don't have risk unless there's a threat that can exploit a vulnerability that can lead to a consequence. So that's really what you're building out, is these credible scenarios where what are the threats that could exploit vulnerabilities that we, at least the ones we're aware of, and what are the consequences that could result.
Right. And then you create a mitigation plan.
Right.
At the far end of it, you have an opportunity then to at least provide some type of recourse to the organization. Here's a plan you can put into place, or here's a way to reduce at least some of the risks that you're facing within the environment you just assessed.
Right. And then there's obviously some things with the process. So you need to calibrate some things like, well, of course, it's only as good as the information you have going into it. So you do have to have good information. You have to have good network architecture diagrams. You have to have good asset inventory. You ideally would have performed a vulnerability assessment prior to that, or use some tool to understand the vulnerabilities that are present in the environment. Then armed with that information and with a good facilitator, then you bring together the subject matter experts that actually really know the system. We always encourage operations to participate, IT security, automation engineers to participate, and even health and safety specialists.
It's interesting that you asked for more to join, right? Because I think that's one of the things that we've been really bad at 20 years ago when we started doing risk assessments. It was, the individual with a clipboard on their hip and off they would go. And I remember that was the first physical risk assessment I did was me and 900 questions standing in front of a site, and I had to work my way into the building. Like, you got to be kidding me. And it was just my perspective. So it's nice that you've actually incorporated this concept of collaboration where you're bringing in the SMEs that they actually who understand the system and what the impact could be. And I like safety in there too. That's a great catch, right? Adding in safety, because I don't think I can't remember over the years how many times I involved the folks in the safety team in risk assessments. I don't think many, right? I don't think we've involved many in the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah, and that seems like a big miss considering the physical elements of it.
Absolutely.
The process that you were describing isn't dissimilar from what we recently did at my work with the CCE. And I'm not sure whether it was S4 or just a meeting where there were people debating which is the better risk assessment. But I think it's
that was Andy Bachman and I. We were on stage at S4 and we were having a friendly conversation. I really like Andy a lot. But it was
well, isn't the right risk like any risk assessment's better than a wild guess?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of parallels between the two methodologies, and in the end, you're right. It's better to follow a methodology than not.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're working with a client, then do you sort of tailor the investigation or the risk assessment process to suit their operation?
A little bit, sure. Every client's a little unique, and you do have to be, as a facilitator of one of these assessments, you have to be flexible. And that's usually how I would describe my role, or the role of somebody doing these, is you're facilitating. You don't have all the answers. Right. You understand the methodology. You understand the general process that's being controlled. You understand automation and cybersecurity, of course, but you don't understand their specific system. Like I said, when you're bringing in operations is key, because operators know, the people who sit behind the console all day, they know all the things that can go wrong, because they've seen, in many cases, they've seen them go wrong, maybe not intentionally, but accidentally. Yeah. And then you explore, well, okay, if that happened one time, or how many times has that happened, number one, and how did it happen? And then could that happen? What could a cyber incident, either intentionally or unintentionally, cause that same consequence?
Yeah. I've been in lots of architectural discussions around these sorts of things too, and I think it was Brian Singer, I remember him in the class that we did with you, and he said, I'd much rather architect my way into a secure solution than try and put security around it afterwards, which I think is great advice. But a lot of these regulations that come out, they are often interpreted by people that don't quite understand, and we seem to spend a lot of time trying to meet specific measures in a guideline without really understanding the underlying intention. Right. And you'd mentioned networking and subnetting and stuff, and I've had people interpret that every subnet needs a firewall between them. I was like, well, not necessarily. I mean, if that's actually going to slow the operation up and make it more difficult to operate, maybe that's not the right solution.
Right. That can be the problem, particularly with these, when they're prescriptive standards or prescriptive regulations, that people interpret them very literally, sometimes too literally. Sometimes you don't have a choice. If it's a regulation that says you must, take the TSA pipeline security directives, that when they first came out, they were very prescriptive and not practical. Yep. In OT environments for many. And then the industry pushed back, and actually TSA moved to a more risk-based approach and allowed the operators to define the risks and put together a plan to address them.
Yeah, we had one of the fellows from the Canadian Energy Regulator on earlier this year, and they too took that, tell us the risks, tell us about your operations. So it's very encouraging to see different practitioners with plenty of time in the field all coming down to, you need to figure out what you're working with and how risk can manifest in your world.
Yeah, every system is different. Even that's one of the things. It could be architecturally the same. It could be the same Honeywell DCS system or Rockwell control system, or you name the vendor. But application matters, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, John, I wanted to ask, when you're going through the process and when you come up with the mitigation strategies, how is it accepted from executives or from leadership? Like, if they understand the process that you've taken and how thorough it is, right? Because it's a very complete process from start to finish. Do you get a lot of pushback from executives, or do you get a lot of I hate disagreement's a politically incorrect term. Do you have some discussions, I guess, with executives moving forward? Have you had to uncover some of that or had to deal with that throughout your career?
It's actually not usually the executives that are. Okay. In fact, it's oftentimes executives that commission these, senior leadership, C-suite, or even board of directors that want a quantified approach to risk, understanding OT risk. The pushback tends to actually be when there is pushback. And as I said, when you do these kind of studies, you're going to have a number of different SMEs in the room, with all coming from their own different backgrounds. So some of it is an exercise in helping to bring these people together that many times, even though they work for the same company, have never met. Yep. So there's some of that the developing some teamwork and breaking down some of the silos. And inevitably, there's almost always that, I hate to say it, but like kind of that one person that objects to and the biggest objection that I've seen over the years is it's impossible to estimate the likelihood of a cyber event.
Wow. Because
you are dealing with a human element. So how can you predict what a human is going to do? It's a valid argument to say, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Risk management, particularly in security, is not a new thing. There's a lot of textbooks written about it. There's a lot of standards written about it. There's methodologies like FAIR that you may have heard of, factor analysis. Yep. That address that. They say, okay, yes, it is hard to estimate likelihood. And I know you've had Terry on your program from Amanaza too, so he has a lot of background in that. You have to break it down into its components. What are the components of likelihood? Well, it's the threat actor and their motivation and their capabilities and the vulnerability of the target and the exploitability of the vulnerabilities. There's a lot of factors. So you can break it down and you can make educated estimates of those individual variables and use that to formulate an order of magnitude estimate of likelihood. And that's really all you need for these types of studies. You're not trying to get down to a precise number. The risk is 1.4573. You are trying to get to an order of magnitude, because really what you're trying to do is rank relative risk.
Are you finding at least conversations with maybe even people considering using cloud as their secondary data center, or even trying to run their business from clouds?
Yeah, we have. We have been working with some, actually it has been in the oil and gas sector. Some operators that operate very lean. They buy up older assets and near end of life assets and kind of get that last bit of profit out of those facilities. And so they do operate very lean. And in order to do that, they've gone to things like cloud for not level 1 control, but level 2, level 3.
Okay.
Interesting.
With interesting strategies around that. So then using redundant cloud providers or disparate cloud providers as a means of some resiliency.
Yeah, I definitely think that's an option with the multi-cloud. But I've also had people challenge that. But I keep pointing to the zone and conduit model to say, if it's your cloud tenant, isn't that a trusted zone? Like, how is that much different than a control center in a locked room?
Right. Well, and that's exactly how you model it. So even before that, I've done some IIoT risk assessments, and we've had people say at some of these conferences, "Oh, the Purdue model's dead," and because it goes right from the cloud to potentially an edge device or a sensor in the field, but you can still model it. You can still say that the device in the field is in one zone. And the cloud is in another zone. You may have some intermediary zones and conduits in between the two, but you can still model it. You just may not have anything at level. You may go from level 1 to level 4, or level 5, but you can still model it and you can still assess it, and the same rules apply. You define the zone, you define the boundary devices or the information flow in and out, and what barriers you have at those boundaries, and you can still do a very valid assessment.
As I was listening to some of your descriptions, I wanted to ask about, if I go back to the CyberPHA process, the model in the risk assessment workshop, is that where some of these great ideas come from? Because it feels like that's where you guys have been spending when you spend time with the SMEs and the folks who understand the environment that you're assessing. Is that where some of these ideas are coming from? Is in those risk assessment workshops?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Yeah. I mean, great conversations take place in those workshops because, like I said, you're bringing together people from different disciplines that have different perspectives, but you're studying the same problems. And, well facilitated, they are very beneficial conversations that you can learn a lot from.
Yeah, perfect, because there is this alignment in the SRM model. One of the steps that we take once we identify the assets that we're assessing, we're looking at what's the risks. We bring everyone into the room, and it could be everywhere from operations to legal to HR, and it comes down to, and then you have a few days worth of what ifs. What if this occurred?
Right,
what if this? And then what would we do to respond? And I think that's where there's such a great parallel between the two models. It's almost as if they've been operating independently, yet they are following the same path, right? From assessing an asset to providing a recommendation. They're following. I'm looking at the diagram on the screen right now, and I've got the ESRM model right beside it. And other than shifting it laterally, it's looking almost the same. It's cool to see the approach that you guys have taken from a very engineered perspective, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, risk management's risk management, and it's not new. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned facilitated a couple of times, and having been in some of these sessions, the facilitator job definitely looks difficult.
Yeah, and not well paid enough, right?
A lot of strong personalities sometimes.
Yeah.
But do you see that as maybe one of the more valuable paths forward in cybersecurity and risk management, is developing that professional capacity to get in there and help a company find out who they are and what they need to do?
Yeah, you're right. It's not an easy task. A good facilitator has to have for obviously good interpersonal skills and be able to manage a room, but also good technical and business knowledge and cyber knowledge, to be able to carry the conversation. They don't have to. They're not expected to be an expert on everything, but they do need to have a basic understanding. So it's not for everyone, but there are. I've worked with a number of people over the last decade that I've been doing these that are excellent.
Now, is that where you see the industry going more towards?
Well, it's common to hear people say that we're moving to a risk-based approach.
Yeah. Yes, I think we've heard that in everywhere, right? So,
but what that means can vary. Because I was recently working with a very large multinational oil and gas company that was saying they were revamping their OT security program, and they said we're taking a risk-based approach. And then the first thing that they did was issued a very prescriptive document with the 20-some controls that they're going to mandate across all their facilities around the world. So not terribly risk-based. But, in fairness, they wanted to establish a baseline.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And part one of those 20-some controls is you must do a risk assessment per the 3-2 methodology. So they are adopting. I was being a little hard, but because the right answer is somewhere between prescriptive and risk-based. There are certain controls that you should always have in place. You don't need to study the risk of having USB controls, for example,
yes.
Right?
Yep.
Or password 123 as the default taped on a wall.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
The table stakes, right? Like that stuff should be there. That's just
table
hygiene,
stakes.
right? There's hygiene
exactly.
that we need to have in place, right? So,
Well, and maybe some of those organizations had to write down the 20 thing as, 19 of these you should have been doing all along.
yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Yeah, okay, I can definitely see that.
And some standardization around that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So risk-based really means using a risk approach to understand what are we missing with our baseline controls.
Right.
What risks didn't we consider, or might there be a way around our controls that we need to be aware of and shore up? But it might not be in every facility. It may only apply to certain facilities and certain applications.
You mentioned quantification a couple of times. How do you help your client discover when they've done enough? Diminishing return kind of conversation.
Yeah, that's a big part of the role of a good facilitator, is to know when you've exhausted and people are going down, wormholes and things.
Rabbit
holes, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can hit that point of diminishing returns. We've talked about this enough. Let's move on to the next.
Yeah.
The other thing that usually is brought to the table is we have this concept of threat classes. So rather than try to explore every possible threat scenario out there, we start with these high-level classes of threats, really borrowing a lot from MITRE and the ICS attack. Even that's a bit too granular if you were to try to study every single vector on MITRE.
It goes deep.
Right. So we usually start at a very high level. At the very highest level, it's what would happen if your control system just went away? So denial of service.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen if it was being tampered with? You were not in control of your control system. That's part of that higher level risk, and that's because that's the two main things that can happen: is it goes away or somebody else is controlling it.
Right.
Neither are preferred states.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah.
You're finding industries are saying, yeah, we need to do this as a risk-based. Do you think it's because they figured out it's too expensive to do everything, or?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, right? That trying to paint everything with the same brush is very expensive.
Yeah.
I think the standards have been encouraging that too. NIST is even the NIST CSF has always had a risk assessment, risk management section, but now they're even with version 2, they're putting more emphasis there, moving it into governance. Mm-hmm. And it talks about all the right things. You have to identify threats, vulnerabilities, consequences. Where I think a lot of companies have struggled is just not knowing how to practically do that. They need a methodology that isn't going to bog them down and be scary. In fact, even sometimes when we say the word CyberPHA or CyberHAZOP, we get a lot of, oh my God, I've sat through HAZOPs. I don't want to do that for cyber. They're awful. So we try to reassure people that at least because it can take weeks to do a HAZOP on a facility. These studies don't take that long because you're doing it in zones.
Yeah.
So it's all really dependent on the number of zones you have. 2 or 3 days of workshop is pretty typical for a facility. It's not weeks.
Awesome.
And you're actively doing that now, right?
Yeah, that's something that I've been doing for the last over 10 years now.
Yeah.
In 4 different companies. So it's a methodology. It's in a standard.
No, that's great.
Absolutely.
From the first time I met you at ISA, this is one of those guys who he knows this stuff inside and out. And I'm so thrilled that you took the time to talk with us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
You betcha. Thanks so much, John. This has been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.